Hey guys, this is Mark, and just an interesting observation here. Sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between a person's ASD-related symptoms versus symptoms associated with being a social outcast of sorts. For example, there's many adults who prefer to live alone and they refuse to date or even marry. Now, is this due to the fact that they are task-oriented versus people-oriented and more concerned with facts than feelings, both of which are ASD traits? Or have they simply been rejected and ridiculed, which is not an ASD trait, for so long that they've learned it's much less painful to travel through life alone? So, food for thought. I'd be interested in your comments below this video. Hey guys, this is Mark, and today I've got a message to the neurotypical spouses out there, and I want to take a look at what's really behind the anger that you witness in your autistic spouse, because there's always something behind the curtain. The only thing you see is anger, but there's a bunch of other stuff going on that's the core issue. We'll look at each of these in turn. It could be anxiety, emotional vulnerability, grief or depression, hurt, low self-esteem, powerlessness, and even fear. So we'll look at each of these in turn. Anger hides anxiety, okay? Our bodies interpret anger as a threat to survival, and as a result, we release adrenaline and noradrenaline to help us cope. Now, these hormones act as an analgesic. In fact, anger makes us feel better in the short term because it numbs our emotional and physical discomfort, but it's not a healthy long-term solution. So people on the autism spectrum should not allow themselves to get addicted to this kind of painkiller. If they do, then outbursts of anger may become a way of life. And unfortunately for too many people, in this case spouses on the autism spectrum, anger has already become a way of life. Anger also hides emotional vulnerability. Some people on the autism spectrum use anger as a way to distance themselves from their NT spouse. Perhaps they feel safer if their spouse is held at arm's length, or maybe they find it hard to express their true personal needs and desires. Anger also hides grief and depression. It's very common for people on the autism spectrum to respond to grief and depression by getting angry. And this is their way of coping with the pain that they're feeling. And the reason that they would opt for anger instead of feeling grief is because anger is less painful. Anger also hides hurt. Admitting that we feel hurt is too much for some of us. It's almost better to explode in rage than to show we care or that we're upset by whatever's happened. So hurt hides behind anger when you feel unloved, rejected, or criticized. And many people on the autism spectrum remember those high school days and all the teasing, harassment, bullying, rejection, and so on. And they have carried that childhood anger into adulthood. Anger also hides low self-esteem. A person on the spectrum who's been experiencing anger control issues for many years may admit to himself, if not to others, that he sometimes struggles with self-esteem issues. He may have internal dialogues that revolve around themes like, any minute now somebody will see that I'm useless or I'm stupid or a complete fraud or not good enough and so on. And sometimes these feelings of shame are just too painful to bear, and a less painful emotion would be anger. Anger hides powerlessness. You know, if we go through life feeling weak, hopeless, helpless, overlooked, or undervalued, anger often hides these feelings of powerlessness. And lastly, anger hides fear. The most common feeling that hides behind anger is definitely fear, but unless we're developing a habit of mindfulness, which is making ourselves aware of our emotions as they arise, it can be difficult to identify the emotions lurking beneath our anger. Our best indication of what those emotions may be is to consider how we feel about ourselves at the times when we are not feeling angry. So those are the 7 big things that really go on behind the anger. What you see is anger, but what's going on behind the anger can be anxiety, emotional vulnerability, grief or depression, hurt, low self-esteem, powerlessness, or fear. If you are struggling in your neurodiverse marriage, then head on over to asdrelationshipsolutions.com, and I'll look forward to seeing you over there. It is often the case that when a neurodiverse couple gets married, one has autism, one does not, that one or both parties brought some previous emotional scars into the marriage. There was some emotional disruption prior to the marriage. You bring it into the relationship, and now you're blaming one another for those emotional scars, when the other person's not to blame, it's something that happened in childhood perhaps, you'll have to do individual work in that case. If you're not okay inside with you, there's no way you're going to be able to work on the relationship problems. You got to fix you first and then work on the marriage problems second. So don't put the cart before the horse. Also, don't expect your spouse to be able to fix you. If this is something that's going on inside of you that was there before you even bumped into one another, you can't expect your spouse to fix that. Your spouse cannot heal your old emotional wounds. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I got a message a very specific message to ASD husbands who are married to an NT wife, and your NT wife experienced some childhood trauma. And now maybe you're paying for the sins of those childhood traumas at some level. But I want to help you make sense of this. If you have an NT wife who has said to you that she had some childhood trauma, there was 4 things that happened back then. 1, the traumatic event was unexpected. 2, the traumatic event was very dramatic. In other words, it was highly emotionally painful. 3, she suffered in isolation. In other words, when she was going through this crisis, she didn't have any social or emotional support from anybody else. So she suffered alone and in silence. And then 4th and final, she had no plan in place to deal with it because she wasn't even sure really what happened or why, let alone what to do about it. Now maybe as an adult she's been in therapy for trauma, so at least now she is hopefully getting a plan. Anyway, those 4 things have to be in place for her to have technically had a traumatic childhood. And so then she grew up feeling like the world in general is fairly unsafe. And then she bumps into you, somebody with autistic traits, one of which being you're somewhat emotionally unavailable and you appear to lack empathy. And so now she doesn't feel safe with you. But she already didn't feel safe at some level before she even met you. So now with the autistic traits that she's experiencing through you, she feels even more unsafe. So what's the message here? Some compassion and empathy. I'm realizing that if she said I had some childhood trauma, and why would she lie about that? That it was an unexpected event that was highly emotionally painful and dramatic. She suffered alone and probably in silence, and she didn't know what to do about it. So maybe you can, if that sounds like something your wife has told you she went through, maybe an extra dose of grace and mercy would be great. That's kind of where I'm going with this video. So, thanks for listening. Hey guys, this is Mark. Click on the join button underneath any of my videos, then click on members only videos, and then click on join. And for $9.99 a month, you'll have access to members only videos, which are excerpts from previous workshops I've conducted for NT partners, ASD partners, and the neurodiverse couple. New videos will be uploaded weekly.